Good afternoon and good morning for those that are in the West Coast or even Central Time. My name is Dr. Jay Pugh. I hope you're ready to have fun with me for the next hour. We're going to be diving into quite a few things with discussing how to build more meaningful dialogue in a hybrid workforce. Now, hybrid could have many different variations. It might mean something along the lines of being remote a couple days a week, being on site a couple days a week. It could mean that hybrid might mean that you're co-located, where you're trying to accomplish common goals, but maybe in two separate locations. Regardless of approach, my goal today is to give you a few nuggets that really helps you to understand the benefits and what strategies go with creating more meaning in a virtual or a hybrid work experience. So for those that may not know, my name is Dr. Jay Pugh. I'm our Vice President of the program for New Horizons Center for Leadership and Development. I've been in this space probably about 8.5 years now. I've been in teaching and training for almost 16. I am an author in the space of engagement, both face-to-face and online. So really, what sort of engagement strategies can you use? And a little bit about me, I have 4 daughters, 2 are biological and 2 are adoptive. All of them are loved and all of them are daughters. So that's why I have these gray hairs still coming through. But that's enough about me. Let's go ahead and hop in and think about this for a minute. And I'd like for you to use your chat to type some responses here when you think about this. What are some benefits and or roadblocks in this new hybrid environment that exists? What benefits or roadblocks do you see? Love that, Rachel. Love the idea of work-life balance. Flexibility, Lee, that's a definite benefit. I like that. There's almost a widening of audience now, Jeff. I agree with that. That's excellent. Kathy, I like a roadblock is that there might be a lack of engagement that may exist because there's a separation between screens. So absolutely. Roadblock is, Melissa, I really like the way you said that, is that there's no more water cooler. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but yes, it's no longer just a happening event that happens. And I think it's really important to recognize that. Rachel, love the idea of team building and training challenges. Absolutely, because engagement once again becomes a factor. Nick, not enriching collaboration you get in the workplace. It's almost a little bit less connective, and it can be. Irma, I agree that it can be more productive depending on industry and department that, yeah, do you know what? I get left alone a little bit more, so I have more time to work. Very good. I love what I'm seeing here. April, yes, you do lose connection. I agree with that. Doug, expense and time savings, commute is a save. Some people, I've seen that used as a benefit and a roadblock, is that, you know what? Some people are like, I don't have time to decompress. And my commute was when I was decompressing on my ride home. And others are like, no, I really am glad that I don't have the commute anymore. So that's really good points. And I love seeing with Tanya, you're saying new hires and training, getting them up to speed, getting them to know the culture is a challenge, updating procedures to fit that model. I really like that, Paul. Sharad, networking becomes a little bit more strategic in what we're trying to accomplish. And if not, it definitely becomes a roadblock. David John, agree entirely that trying to keep the attention of people is really important. That art of captivation, if you will. Mark, there is less pressure. I would agree with that. You can determine what gets taken care of. I always say there's less drive-by questions that exist, which creates a little bit of an advantage. And Tanya, I love that. Hybrid lets the team take more ownership that they might not in the office. So there's a little bit more self-accountability. Yep, and agreed. It's harder to shut it off at home. There's a lack of boundaries sometimes that can exist whenever when we're working from home. Hard to manage poor performers because it's out of sight, out of mind, Rachel. And benefit the hybrid work attire. The business mullet. Yes, I've heard this about the business mullet quite a bit. I love this terminology that as long as you're presenting yourself on camera, you know, that there might be a little bit more flexibility in the approach. So really great stuff, folks. Love the participation right out the gate. And I'm going to share a few extras that might exist. So I think that some benefits and roadblocks that exist. Number one is that there is flexibility and there's a little bit more understanding of the human that exists that goes with home. For example, you might have a doctor's appointment. Before, you'd have to commute to the office, you'd have to leave, then come back to the office, and there was a lot of lost time because of it. Whereas now it's, hey, I need to get out of here for an hour and do that, but I can work when I get home. And there's almost a little bit more flexibility with that. That's a huge component. The disadvantage that starts to come into play here is this: out of sight, out of mind mentality. I've seen a lot of responses that came about engagement, that came into play about water cooler talks. And what happens is that because we don't see it, we don't think about it. So example is, let's talk water cooler talks. How many of us strategically go out of our way to maybe schedule 5 minutes? Maybe it's not a meeting, but you schedule 5 minutes on your calendar to say, I'm going to reach out to Mark today, or I'm going to reach out to Rachel today, or I'm going to reach out to Paul today. How many of you schedule those for yourselves from a proactive mindset? So we have a couple. Good. We have a couple. The once again, out of sight, out of mind mentality becomes a little bit of a challenge, because if we don't take a proactive measure, then we're going to be reacting to it. So that's been the biggest challenge, is really strategizing our time to say, this is when I'm going to connect with so-and-so. This is going to be when I connect with this person. And then you really find strategies to really create meaning with them. So we're going to talk about what sort of strategies go into play there. I really like that probably technology has created a much more competitive work market. I really love that part. That's probably one of the greatest advantages, is that, you're not just working within a local sector, you really can be sprouting out into larger and even more talent that's across the country. But on the same side, that creates a little bit more competition. So what do we do? What do we do with this out of sight, out of mind mentality? Well, the first thing we do is we have to get to leadership first, location second. It is critical to know what your leadership style is, what your leadership approaches are. How do you lead yourself? How do you lead others? It's really important to know what your particular leadership style is. Now, what I mean by that is there's some people that really thrive in the servant leadership space, to where, do you know what? I am here for my team. If you need me, you reach out. I am always available, in that mentality. And there are other leaders that take a little bit of a different approach, with more of a transformational, which is something of, we're going to create mutual expectation to create a better environment for ourselves. So I'm not always going to be available. However, I will share my calendar with you. You find an open slot, I will be there. So there's different expectations on the type of leader you find yourself to be and how that's going to work with your team. We have to revisit that in the forming stage. What we also have to do is recognize what tools and technology can bring the most out of us. Now, I'm going to ask you all a loaded question, and this is not in the slide, but I like to ask this a little bit more on the spot. What are your thoughts on cameras? What are your thoughts on cameras? I love this. I love it. I love this. Do you see the mixed reaction? This is challenge number 2, right? And this is a big thing, is that it's important to recognize, how are we using the tools and technology to be most beneficial? I'll give an example. If I'm having a meeting with 50 people on there, I might not have the cameras on. I might not want to eat up the bandwidth. It might be shared information only, and that might be one thing. However, if I am having a meeting with my direct team, I might say, hey, folks, I haven't seen you. I want to connect with you. I'd love for us to be able to have the camera on so we can communicate and connect. So there's different ways that you can leverage things like cameras and Teams chats, or if you use Slack. And so I will say, yep, with clients, I'm a big fan of cameras always on. I am, because I think it does create more connectivity. We'll talk about that in just a few moments. And Kelly, this is a great point. If the camera's not working, there's four things that I always like to say comes into play, and it's known as acts. Number one, we have to ensure that before we have any dialogue, we have to make sure, number one, people have access to the technology, which means it is working. So that's the first thing is we have to ensure, do our cameras work? If not, we need to get you one. We need to make sure that that's available. So that's the first thing they need is access. And David John, you're right that yes, the perception is not listening. So this is where we have to have confidence in our employees to be able to utilize those features and own them. So that might look like trust. I trust you're getting this down. Or it might say, look, it's not that I don't trust you, but I want to have the confidence that when we're communicating that there's things that are resonating. Number three is training. We have to make sure that people know the training with the tools and technology that exists. If we don't know how to use these channels, then it's not going to be effective. And the last one, and this is the most important one, are standards. What standards do we have in play? So, for example, our standards in our workforce is that if I'm having a meeting with you and there's a team meeting or something of that sort, the cameras are on not because I'm requiring it, but because I need you to know how important it is in the way that we communicate. However, if it is an all-call situation, I'm not gonna force hands on that. And so those are standards that we implement. It's the same thing with standards on how do we share information? Do we share it in a Teams channel? Do we share it in a SharePoint location? How are we sharing our information? That's a standard that we have to make sure we're paying attention to. So you're not just trying to open a box and say, hey, we got this new shiny new tool. It's really understanding what can I use within this tool to create the most impact. That's where then skills and impact come into play. So when this comes into play, I want us to talk a little bit more about the perceptions that need to be discussed, that we're not listening or that we're not there altogether. And I'll give a good example here. How do you think I'm determining whether or not you're paying close attention or not? Can't see any of you. It's a webinar platform, so unfortunately, I'm going to be the only one. Now we're talking, right? So number one, we're talking on a space of quick reaction, response time, the way that interaction's coming into play. And whenever I'm reading chat, I'm not just reading chat, I'm giving a name with the chat so that I'm like, oh yes, absolutely. I love the fact that Doug mentioned response time. That's big. So that makes it a little bit more engaging in technique. Putting a name with the response is critical. So I can pay attention to chat. I use buttons at times, right? Hand raisers, making sure that there's connectivity there. So there are different ways that even without seeing, you can still garner some sort of interactivity with what you're trying to achieve. Now, Amber, I love what you said, asking for responses. Does anybody know what type of questions I'm asking? I like it. Open. They are open-ended. Yep. Probative. Absolutely. They are short answers to start, right? Now, if we were having a more intricate meeting, what I might start asking is something known as metacognitive questions. Does anybody know what metacognitive questions are? Metacognitive. I love that, Mark. Perfect. That's one thing you can do, Kelly, is create more multiple choices. Yes, Lee, the goal is that they are thought-provoking. The goal is I'm trying to ask you questions to get you to think about the way you're thinking. That's why I'm asking you, what are benefits and roadblocks? Because it's what it looks like to you. It's the way that you think in your environment. So we need to ask more thought-provoking questions that get people to think about the way they're thinking. So what these questions might look like are, talk to me about that. That might be a phrase. Talk to me about that. So they might say something and I might say, you know, Kelly, talk to me about the multiple choice questions and the way you use them. That's metacognition. Another thing that I might use is, show me what that looks like. Show me what that looks like. Or what does that look like to you? Might be a metacognitive question. You want to try to focus on questions. Walk me through it. They're also known as inquiry-based questions, inquiry with an E, not inquiry with an I, that their goal is to focus on discovery. You're asking questions for discovery. Help me understand's a great one, Lee. Love that. Help me understand it. Walk me through it. Explain it to me. Show me what that looks like. All the above. I really like questions that really get to thought-provoking approaches. How do you best use X? Is a question I love to ask. How do you best use this? That's a metacognitive question. It's getting them to reflect on their current practices and think deeply about it. So that's some strategies and initial approaches that you could take to sort of connect with people. Now, what about this whole relationship and connectivity thing? How do we get more connective in the remote environment? How do we do that? How many of you are like, that's why I'm here? Can you please walk me through it? That's it. I love it. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. Number one, it can be some team meetings. It can be a quick call, a check-in, constant communications, right? And it might not be through virtual tap. And that's the thing is, so here's the thing. There could be group get-togethers. And there could be, here's where my view is on happy hours. And I'm just going to give my 2 cents. It doesn't make me right, and it doesn't make anybody else wrong. I think that if you use them sparingly, and it's not something that is overused from the look of the group, it will become less stale in approach. So the more you can maybe mix something up with it, and it doesn't have to be super frequent, people will gravitate to it. So those are okay. The one thing that I like to do is I gave out my cell phone number to team members and leaders and things like that. And I'm honestly, I do like, hey, we have to have an offline call. We have to have an offline call, which is basically meaning I really want to know how you're feeling and doing. So those are certain things that you can shift into. What this is known as is a model of building better virtual teams is relationship management as a foundation. So what that means, and I'll tell you what happened with the COVID days, and I love that you brought that up, Tanya, is because when we bring up relationship management, one of the first things that comes into play is that we were thrust into a COVID era, and what happened was everybody went into survival mode and we went straight into task management. So nobody checked in, nobody saw how anybody was doing, and because of that, we ran into issues. We need to flip it back on its axis and get into relationship management. In some cases, this could be group chats. I will say be cautious with group chats because they can turn into complaint sessions. And so you got to be a little bit hesitant on those cases with that. But I do like group chat if the intent is to help each other solve problems. Now, from a relationship management standpoint, I'm a huge fan of really focusing, and this is a term that I've really found to be over time to be beneficial. So this is the Dr. J. Pugh stamp of approval, is I call it finding their VIPs. The more that you know somebody's VIP, the more you can be able to establish a more meaningful relationship with them. Now, what is VIP? VIP stands for values, interests, and preferences. Values, interests, and preferences. So what that means is, number one, what do people value? Do they value collaboration or do they value autonomy? Do they value trust or do they value servant leadership? Do they value saving time or making time? I'll give an example here. And I always say this, Brandon is a big, Brandon and I think on the same wavelength. So I really like Brandon a ton. Brandon and I speak the same language. We're very much about saving each other time, knowing what needs to be taken care of, and then we can get to the fun stuff afterward, right? Whereas the person that Brandon works for, her name's Lori. She's amazing. She's our VP of marketing. She's fantastic, but she is a collaborator. So if there's something she needs, I make time for her. Whereas if there's something she needs from me, she does a great job of saving me time. I'm not one that would love for somebody to check in with me often. I don't want that. But I know that there are people that value that. So because of that, I'm going to shift. So you really have to ask yourself what each individual that works for you, what is it that they really value? Do they value space? Do they value nurturing? Do they value your ability to listen, to have them vent and get it off their shoulders? Or do they want you to fix a problem? Do they want advice? What do they value? That's the first key piece. So I'll give an example here that I have some account executives. There are some that I know want me to make time for them. And there are others that I know want me to save them time. So I know exactly which ones are which. I have facilitators, same thing. They want to collaborate on curriculum. There's some that do, and there's some that let me take a shot first, and then I'll run it by you and you can give me feedback. Know those values. That's the first rule of thumb. Number two, know their genuine interests. I know we get into things like small talk and we get into things like how's the family and how's this. Not everybody talks about family. Some people are more private. Some people are more public. What are they? It's important to know that. I'll give an example. I love my girls. I really do. But I can't tell you how many times conversations start with, how are the girls doing? And it's like, there's a lot of them. What do you need? And it's not trying to be impersonal, but that's where, once again, in your mindset, it's important to know yours and it's important to know theirs. So if they're big on family, I'm going to make sure that I share and I might open more up about my family. Whereas with others, that might not be a priority in the interest for them. But it's important for you to know yours and it's important for you to know theirs. What are their hobbies? What are they interested in? Are they a sports fan? Are they readers? Are they artistic? Are they musical? What sort of interests are there? What makes them human, as I like to say? And the third piece of this is preferences. I love preferences, folks. This is going to be a fun one, right? Ready for this? I'm going to ask you all a very fun question. I always break the day up into 4 sectors. There's the early morning, the late morning, the early afternoon, and the late afternoon. When are your peak times and your weak times? When are your peak times and weak times? For me, I'll give an example. I am an early bird. If you wanted to meet with me at 7 a.m., I'm in all day long. And see that, so Mark, what we call that is so there's different battery types of people that they have. Mark, you and I would click on every level. David, John, the same thing. I am very much an early morning person. And at the end of the day, I can't stand, if you schedule a 4 o'clock meeting with me, I can't stand it. Can't stand it. So that's where I know mine is. But I know team members that I have, and I know which ones are early morning people like me, and that's whenever I can check in with them. I know which ones are late morning people, the ones that I like to say, let me get my cup of coffee and get a couple things out under my wing, and then I'll go in there. And then there's the people that have the after lunch. They get lunch in them, and now they feel more energized because they go, now I got 3 hours, 4 hours left of my day. I'm ready to roll. And then there's some that are they're late afternoon people, that they are night owls or they're late day people. Know when their preferences are. When are their peak times? When are their weak times? And because of this, and Kelly, right? But here's the thing, you want to know why it is for them? They might have had calls all day, and that's their one time where they're like, you know what? I need to just not think about work. So this is going to be a meeting I'm going to have with you because I feel like I'm fresh with just new ideas, getting away from the monotony of my day. So it could. And I do have some people that it does work with that. So this is a great question. How do I work with somebody at schedule at 4 p.m.? Here's the rule of thumb. Who is doing the asking? Who is doing the asking? Doug, and that's the thing. For many people, it will. For many people, it will. But there are some people that they need that 4 p.m. on the Friday to say, this is the last thing I need to do, and I need to get this taken care of, or I'm not going to sleep this weekend. So there are some people in that way. So the question is who is doing the asking? As leaders, I typically try to adapt to my team. I really do I try to adjust to my team. So I try to create some flexibility. However, it is okay to be transparent with people about what it is you prefer in your communication. It's okay to do that. I think everybody that knows me knows I'm an early morning person. They know it. And it's not because it's like, if you're going to communicate with me, this is the only time. It's just more of, if you need something from me, I'm going to be at my freshest then. But if you want a 4 p.m., I'm in, but I got to dig a little deeper for it. It is good, folks. One thing I stress is that it would be a great practice exercise to go to each of your team and ask them, what do you value in the way that you work? What are you really interested in as a human being? Not in the workspace, but you as a human being. And what do you prefer in the way that you, want to communicate based on time? And the other thing that goes with preference is, how do you want to be communicated with? I will tell you this. Personally speaking, this is where the support comes into play with the preferences. I am not an I am person. If you I am me, my first thought is, this can be an email. Why isn't this an email? Or if this is more in depth, how many of you go back and forth on the IM chat and you're like, oh my gosh, I just need to pick up the phone at this point? Know your preference in communication and then pay attention to theirs too. Because if I need something from a team member, there are certain people I will email. There are certain people that I'll say, can you call me real quick? And that's the thing, right? Liren, I love that, is that it's something of, this could have been an IM, and everybody has their mode of preference when it comes to communication channels. And so here's the thing, you ready for this? I didn't even get to the one I prefer the most. I am not always available. This is a big rule in leadership that I have to teach you all. You do not always have to be available. However, when you are available, be 100% visible. I will say that again. You don't always have to be 100% available. However, if you are available, you need to be 100% visible, present, actively listening, invested. So for me, I share my calendar with everybody on the planet. And all they have to do is block a spot. You block a spot for me, I'm in. You don't even have to IM me and then say, hey, is your calendar open? I just want to make sure I saw this open. No, get a spot. Get a spot. It is important to know what it is you prefer, but I know not everybody wants a meeting. I know that too. So for me, I'm going to pay attention to the people I'm going to reach out on Teams real quick, which people I'm going to reach out via a quick, hey, can I call real quick? and which ones I'm going to shoot an email and leave it to the ether and know they're going to get back to me. Pay attention to their VIPs, folks. You will gain a lot more ground in the relationship management and in the communication management. You get both of those things, guess what you start to have? Stronger task management. Why? Not only are you getting more productivity and efficiency, but now you work with people that really do think you get them. Not that you just get it, but you get them. Thoughts on that? Pretty cool stuff? All right. So think about this for a second. What tips do you ensure that you have commitment and not compliance in your virtual meetings? Are they truly engaged? How can you tell? We talked about chat responses, interaction. Very good. Follow-up's key. Love that. Lee, great question as this is happening. How do you adjust to those who won't follow? The big thing that I do is I try to make the dialogue as we-driven and as transparent as possible. Meaning, if there's a disconnect, I want to make sure that we have a way that we functionally communicate with each other and that it's effective. Not that it's communicating the way I want or the way you want, but it's what's most effective for us together. I love the idea of making it fun. It can be, right? It can be incorrect responses. If the camera's on, it's more visible. This is a big thing that I like to discuss. I'm a huge fan of making sure that my content in any meeting has 4 major components. And that's it, Jose. The outline and agenda is going to be big. And there's 4 components in the way that I always like to lay out information when I'm communicating with others. Number 1 is the analysis. These are the Little Johns of the world, right? You know why? Because they turn down for what? Brace yourself. Musical references and dad jokes on this second half of the webinar. Hope you're ready. So they want the what? What do we know? What do we need to know? What information is provided for us? We need to be able to have the what somewhere present in the information that we have. The second piece of this is the why. And we have to pay attention to the why, which is the big picture. This is why this matters in the grand scheme of things. How do we create meaningful synthesis? How does this create an overall arching effect? How does this impact mission, vision, and so on? Basically, there's people that are sitting in that meeting that are Backstreet Boys. Anybody know why? Tell me why. Ain't nothing but a heartache. No, you got to tell me why. If you tell me why this is important, I will be much more bought into this. That's where that goes in. Oh, there we go, folks. Now the trains are running. So because of this, we have the why that's coming into play. We have to have the what and we have to have the why, which is analysis and big picture stuff. Then we got to go to my main man, Montel Jordan, one-hit wonder in the 1990s, who once so eloquently stated, this is how we do it. There are people that are procedural-minded folks. They want the procedure. They want the how we get from point A to point B. This is great that we know why. This is great that we have the information to back it up. How do we move? That's where the Montel Jordans of the world come in, and this is how we do it comes into play. Walk them through steps. Step 1, step 2, step 3. You have to have some sort of steps for guidance so that they know what expectations are when they leave. See, Beth, I'm not a miracle worker. You know what I mean, Beth? But hey, we're going to do our best. I'll tell you that. All right. So, and Jeff, I like that. You got to stay within the focus, right? And that's the thing is, I always believe in I really believe in having a 50-minute meeting instead of an hour meeting. I schedule all my meetings to be 25 minutes or 50 in case A, it does run over, then all of a sudden we're not freaked out for time. But B, if we are done and somebody needs to chat with me after, that's available. And number 3, if we don't, then we gave you 10 minutes back in your day to work on something you need to. So I agree with that, Jeff. I love that PAL approach. From a content perspective, I really try to make sure that there's analysis, big picture, wide effects of vision. How do we get from point A to point B? And then I ask the questions. This is where interpersonal application comes in. This is the great rock band. Who are you? Who are you in the way this gets applied? So this is a huge component in understanding how does this impact you? This is also the art of what we call WIFM. Anybody know what WIFM stands for? WIFM? Beth with the mic drop. Love it. What's right? No, I like that. That's good. Work honestly from home. I like that, Jose. What's in it for me? If there's not a reason why they can take something meaningful away from it, then it doesn't matter. What is clear to us is not always clear to others. So we have to ask them how it's important to them. We have to include them in the dialogue. We have to include them in the input. And we're not doing it to say, hey, I really want participation, but it's almost saying, look, you have as much stake in this as I do, so I really want to understand you. That's why. And the reason why those 4 things matter is because there are 4 different thinking styles that exist in our life. There is the analytical mind that we have that values numbers, data, information, assessments, what is known. We value the things that are conceptual, creativity, innovation, taking a risk, purpose, mission. We value the things that are procedural, reliability, structure. And we value the things that are interpersonal, that are connective, that are relationship driven. So what is available to you? There is a worksheet after this that has a 4 square for content. That's for you to practice anytime you want. But the next meeting you're going to have, make sure that all 4 boxes are checked. And true or false, could this be your agenda? Could this be part of your agenda? Love it. Love it. All right, let's talk a little bit more on the engagement side of things then. I'm going to talk to you a couple of things that I try to do to create further engagement. Has anybody caught any nuances? We're going to do a little behind the scenes, little tricks up the sleeves, if you will. Anybody catching what I'm doing? Has this been engaging so far? And if so, what is it about it? Great catch, Doug. The silence is a massive best friend in remote meetings. We get uncomfortable, right? We get uncomfortable with silence. Silence is your best friend because somebody's going to have to speak up. Don't fill the void. Excellent. Number 2, the valuing of input. That is key. I love that, Lee. And Mark, I didn't miss, Mark and Insidua, I didn't want to miss that. I'm going to come back to those. But yes, if somebody provides responses, it's not just saying, I love that. It's, I love that you said this because. It's called inclusive feedback. Inclusive feedback. And that's where, Christine, you're right. The tone and humor becomes a welcoming environment rather than just we're in a meeting to have a meeting. The references, making it fun, right? And I agree, Tanya, right? Don't wait or don't answer the question. Wait. Live in the silence. They will speak up. Don't even correct yourself. Because what will happen is that if they didn't understand the question, one of them's going to hop on and say, hey, I wasn't paying attention, and or something along the lines of, you know, I might not understand it. Can you rephrase it? And that's okay. But let them tell you that so that you know where to shift. And the interactivity is key. I don't like to speak the entire time. I think that we have a tendency to where I always like to start with questions rather than start with content. I like to start with questions first because it baits them into the dialogue. So I agree with that, folks. Good strategies. Excellent. That is what I'm using a lot of that. Here's a couple others that I want to let you know. Number one, and this is not from me. This is from Michael Wilkinson's 8 core practices of facilitative leaders. Number one, always be the first one on the call. Because as they come in and you greet them, it's like Lauryn Hill and the Fugees. You can't run. You can't hide. I'm going to find you. They know that you know that they're there. So if I call somebody by name, Rachel, Christine, Mark, Janet, what happens is that now eyes perk up and they're invested. I'm not calling out, I'm calling on. So I'm addressing positively to individualized responses. We have a tendency that when somebody gives an answer, we go, I like that. Instead of saying, I love that, Lee. Lee, that's a great response because of X. Now, Lee's going to be more invested in that dialogue. What Michael Wilkinson, there's different variations of the 4 E's, or explain purpose, people, process, and participation. That's also the 4 square for content. There's many different variations. The easiest way to remind this is if you don't have a what, you don't have a why, you don't have a how, and you don't have a who this impacts, somebody's going to be going bye-bye in that meeting. Somebody's not going to be paying attention. I'm going to say about ground rules. I am a firm believer in empower, not require. Empower, not require. I didn't tell anybody that they had to respond at all, did they? I didn't say that to any. I didn't say, hey, you type these in. I mentioned you might want to type these in the chat and make it easier, but I'm not going to force rules. Just like with cameras. I'm not going to force you to be on, but I'm going to show you why it's connective and important. So one thing I do with ground rules is I don't require, I empower. Here's one way I empower cameras. Anybody ever hear of the 738-55 rule? Also known as the Mehrabian rule? No worries. Out of 100% of what we communicate to somebody else, only 7% received are the actual words being stated. 7%. And if you don't believe me, I'm going to pick 3 examples here. Ready? Kathy, that's a great insight. Melissa, that's a great insight. Beth, that's a great insight. Now that's not fair to Beth. I said the same thing 3 different ways. It had 3 completely different meanings. Why is that? Because 38% of what we deliver, and Candace, you're right, is the vocal delivery. It's intonation. It's not just tone. It's intonation. It's rhythm. It's pace. It's emphasis. And it's silence. It's how you use your pauses. It's vocal delivery. Christine, this is called the Mehrabian rule. And it's also known as the 738-55 rule. Albert Mehrabian was a famous sociolinguistics professor from UCLA. And he was huge in the space of socially focused linguistics and approaches. And you're right, Christine, is that it's not what you say, it is how you say it. But ready for this? That's still only 45%. The 55% that comes into play is how you show it. It's in your body language. So this is where I say to people, I'm not asking you to be on camera so I can monitor and see, are you paying attention? No, I'm asking you to be on camera because I want to catch the aha moments that stick out to you. Or if there's something you're contemplating, I want to bring it to light. I want to catch the aha moments and the thinking moments. I want to catch the moments that stick out to you. That's how we connect. This is where eye contact. Now, not just eye contact with the camera. I'm not saying you have to look into the camera like tonight at 5. See what's happening in your neck of the woods. You're not a newscaster. I mean that you're being connective in your approaches with where you're looking on screen. Are you looking over here and you're monitoring way over here and then nothing's happening over here? That might be a challenge, right? Or where are they paying attention is really where that comes into play. It's also things like facial expressions, posture. My posture's always leaned in, except when I ask questions, I'll sit back for a moment. Yeah, great question on this is how do you doesn't know how to control them. As we call that, I believe we call that RBF, also known as resting basic face, right? That's okay. So resting basic face happens to the best of us. The one thing that I really try to do is I'm very intentional about my responses. And you can't fake it. You can't fake it. But I will say this in the way that the moment what I'm doing is I'm listening for key words and then I perk up when I hear key words and it naturally causes me to engage. So I'll give an example. Somebody might have said, you know, if they're communicating a meeting and they say, let's say Christine says, people forget what you said, but they remember how you made them feel. I'm going to think of that as, you know what, that's memorable. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to use this articulation, gesticulation, which is gesturing, and my posture, which is leaning into it. That's how you can make up for some of that facial expression that exists. Use sort of your body, your actual body to lean in, to invest. Because you can still be stoic and stone-faced, but be in. Body language is critical. So that's why I just share that with the team. I'm saying, look, if I'm having you on camera, I promise it's not because I'm seeing, are you paying attention? That's why people are like, I'm not even dressed up for today. It's just me and you. I don't care. I don't care. We're not in front of clients. Perfectly okay. I want to see you as a human being. That's important. Other things, as we talked about, metacognitive questions, engaging round robins. If you're going to do breakouts, keep them brief, please, and keep them infrequent. I think breakouts get overused quite often. Really only do it if you're trying to really invoke further spurring up of ideas. If we're out of ideas, brainstorm breakout. Other than that, don't overuse it. I love virtual agreement. Here's an example of this. We're so guilty of saying, all right, everybody understand? Are we on the same page? And you'll get silence and you go, great, see you later. And then you leave. Instead, what I typically do is ask a question, and it can be polling. I think Kelly said that earlier. I like polling. It could even be a use of the buttons. If you've had a great time today, do me a favor, hit the reactions icon down at the bottom and just give me a thumbs up or a smiley face or something like that if you've had a great time. They're all flying up. They're all flying up on my third screen. That is verbal or non-verbal agreement. Get that virtual agreement. Don't leave it without it. Otherwise, things are left unsaid. Screen sharing. If you shift to dialogue and nothing else needs seen, turn it off or pause the share. And always have a follow-up. I always love action items because then the meeting doesn't get cold and stale. Everybody knows what the next things are taken care of, and that's where we follow up. And I don't send it the day before. I will send it the day after, or I'll send it after the meeting pretty routinely. And then what I'll do is I'll send the follow-up a day before. Now, last final things I want to get into for the last 2 minutes is virtual setup. One thing you can do to bring out more engagement in your camera is I'm a big fan of camera presence. Newscasters do it. I think people on camera do it. Influencers do it. But it's a really good approach to practice and say, you know what, if I'm going to make an impression with you in the first 7 to 30 seconds, I want to make sure I'm making the most of it. So what I do is typically I make sure I'm centered on camera, first and foremost, centered vertically and centered horizontally. That's why this banner you see behind me isn't just to say, hey, look at that logo. Yeah, it's cool to have the branding, but it also keeps me centered on camera this entire time. My shoulders are staying between the logo. Second is making sure I'm a very tall person. So it is quite a possibility that I could cut my head off when I'm speaking. And I'm going, whoop, no, we're not going to do that. So this forces me to lean in. So it keeps me vertically centered. So your centering is going to be really important here. You don't want to make it seem like the whole background's eating the distance and there you are. You want to make sure that you take up most of the camera space and you're centered. Other things that I do, lighting. I'm going to show you a cool little trick. Ready? And don't mind my bubbly, but if I go over here, look what happens to my face the moment that the moment that light comes into screen. Oh no. Now I'm all dark. What that means is that it's contrast. So I like to have light behind me, but off camera, because then it creates glow. See, it creates a glow. Other things that I like to do, I really like to make sure that if I am communicating with people, that I'm always square to the camera I'm facing. You don't have to be looking at it, but I'm square. I'm going to be square shoulders to it because it shows openness. I do believe in dressing professionally. I like that David John said the business mullet. You know, that's funny. I like that term. But if I'm on camera, I'm going to be bringing the A game. So I do try to dress professionally on that. Lastly, with better online presence is just make sure that if there's something in these corners, you want to showcase something that does look like it's important to you. So have something slightly personal that's important to you. Other than that, folks, we have about 5 minutes remaining. What questions, final questions, comments, concerns do we have? I certainly do. Please tell Jamie I said hello and that I miss her dearly. Yes, Melissa, great question. Yeah, so I'll send the initial agenda after the meeting, but then I will send a follow-up just to remind them that these are the action items we focused in on. You're absolutely right, Jeff. You have to know your audience 100%. 100%. Rachel, I like to do something. Once again, I agree with Jeff that you have to know what engages your team. So for that, what I would say with the routine meetings is know what interest those VIPs are. And then from there, you could either A, schedule those meetings around when they're most engaging or comfortable. And number two, find out what they enjoy. Because then if you find out what they enjoy, then you can kind of bring that in. I had a bunch of salespeople that at one point in my career that they were big on, like, they all had kids and they all loved Disney stuff. So that was something they just did, was like, here, they would bring in something, sprinkle in some fun and make it Disney related. But that was a common interest they had. So it is certain things like that to see how different audiences are going to react. The best thing that I can say is focus on the individualized interests, Rachel, and then bring in activities or bring in communication that sort of reflects that a little bit. All right. I'm going to pass the mic over to Brandon. Thank you all so much. Stay on just for a moment with him. And I really want to thank you for spending time with me.
Well, thank you so much, Jay. If we can all give Jay a round of applause in the reactions, or go ahead and say thank you in the chat. I already see tons of them. Jay, this has been a great hour. So we so appreciate it. As you are leaving, you are going to get a 1-question survey just asking you, would you like to continue the conversation? All that means is if you've enjoyed what we've been discussing today and you're like, you know what, I could use this more in my life. I feel like there's a lot more I could learn, or this could benefit my company, my team, whatever. Go ahead and say yes to that question. because then we can go ahead and get you connected with the right people to have those discussions as to what your needs are and how we can go ahead and get you that help and get you that information. So when you do get that question popping up, go ahead and say yes if that is something that interests you. Other than that, we just want to thank you all so much for coming today, and we hope to see you in the future.